Eksperimen tu masih tak tahu is it online or face to face. It depends on how long you need to be quarantined. I will keep you updated. Okay. And now let's look at this one. The one that I showed you yesterday. So I made some corrections on this slide. And anaerobic respiration is not in the syllabus. We just want you to see the differences between anaerobic and fermentation. That's all. You can ignore this, to be honest, but then just to let you see the three pathways, the three cellular pathways. We have aerobic yang perlukan oxygen, and then anaerobic and fermentation in the absence of oxygen. Tapi macam yang hari tu Miss dah terangkan, even though anaerobic it doesn't use oxygen, it still involves the complete oxidation of glucose. It means it still involves the complete breakdown of glucose. The only difference is that it doesn't use oxygen as the final electron acceptor. Dia ada benda lain sebagai final electron acceptors dalam ETC dia. Kalau untuk aerobic respiration, electron transport chain final electron acceptor dia ialah oxygen. I hope you still remember this. But then for anaerobic respiration, the final electron acceptors is something else, something other than oxygen. And biasanya dia berlaku dalam prokaryotes sahaja. Tak ada dekat kita ya. Kita tak boleh buat anaerobic respiration. Yang kita punya anaerobic pathway ialah fermentation. Tapi kita tak guna anaerobic respiration. So if you talk about your muscle cell or your red blood cell, then they are all fermentation. Okay, something extra for you to know. Class, dalam sel kita ada je sel yang hanya buat lactate fermentation in our body. Okay, in our body there's this cell that only do fermentation, lactate fermentation, and that's the red blood cell. So write it down somewhere in your notes. Okay, I tak ada ruang yang kosong So just jot down somewhere, maybe on the first slide. First slide yang ada comparison aerobic dengan fermentation tu, you boleh tulis red blood cells do not undergo aerobic respiration. Dia tak boleh pun buat aerobic respiration. It only undergoes lactate fermentation. Okay? I nak you tahu benda ni sebab mana tahu nanti tiba-tiba dekat exam dia tanya pasal red blood cell, then at least you have the concept. Red blood cell memang tak boleh carry out aerobic respiration sebab red blood cells dia tak ada mitochondria. No mitochondria, as well as ada je yang another role. Red blood cells, can anyone tell me what is the role of red blood cells? Dia buat apa? Dia transport
oxygen.
Very good. Transport oxygen. So class, imagine dia bukan carry out dia transport. Carry out means dia mengendalikan, tapi dia transport oxygen. So you need to use the right term. Transport oxygen, kalaulah dia yang transport, dia yang guna oxygen tu, will it be efficient? Berkesan ke tak? Dia yang tolong transport, tapi dia juga yang guna.
No. Habislah nanti.
Habislah, that's it. So macam you beli barang dekat Shopee ke mana-mana, dia tolong deliver, dia pula guna benda yang you beli tu. So it's not efficient at all. That's why red blood cells, they must undergo lactate fermentation so that they will not use the oxygen they transport. Okay, the reason why it needs to use lactate fermentation to produce ATP. Kenapa red blood cell perlu? Sebab dia pun sel dia kena kerja, dia pun perlukan ATP. So they produce the ATP through lactate fermentation. Why is it must be not using oxygen? Sebab dia yang transport. Kalau dia yang transport, mestilah dia tak boleh guna oksigen tu. So dia tak guna oksigen to make sure efficient transport of oxygen. Okay, to make sure the transport of oxygen is efficient. Boleh faham?
Boleh, Miss.
Okay, right. So that's the reason why red blood cells dia hanya carry out lactate fermentation. Dia tak guna aerobic respiration to produce ATP so that dia tak akan guna oksigen yang dia transport. Ini one of the reasons. Another one is because dia memang tak ada mitochondria pun. So tak bolehlah carry out cellular respiration. Dua lah reason. And another type of cells, okay, another type of cells that we know only carry out aerobic, okay, ini based on Campbell. Of course, kalau I baca sources lain, dia cakap dia adalah buat lactate fermentation. Tapi mostly, okay, these cells, the brain cells, I would say it mostly, okay, or I would say almost all the time, okay, almost all the time. Almost all the time, they carry out aerobic respiration. Have you heard of brain death?
Yes, Miss.
This thing happened within few minutes. Kalau 4 to 6 minutes, the brain doesn't receive any oxygen, then the brain cells will start to die. And itu yang akan buatkan orang tu paralyzed, coma. Okay, that's brain death. So we must make sure the brain cells will always get the oxygen for the aerobic respiration. So we can say that brain cells, they're almost all the time hanya buat aerobic respiration. Sebab masa yang singkat je yang dia boleh tahan tak ada oksigen. Maybe 1 to 3 minutes around that time, dia boleh tahan tak ada oksigen. Compared to all other body cells, brain cells dia memang tak dapat tahan period yang panjang, a long term without, bukan long term lah, macam a longer time without oxygen. That's why we say that brain cells only carry out aerobic respiration. Kalau dia boleh buat lactate fermentation tu pun very short time, masa yang sangat singkat, beberapa minit je. Lepas tu, the brain cells will start to die. That's why brain cells dalam Campbell, okay, dalam Campbell, dia cakap brain cells hanya carry out aerobic respiration. So ini memang opposite of red blood cells. Red blood cells hanya buat lactate fermentation, whereas brain cells hanya buat aerobic respiration. Just write it down somewhere in your notes so that it's easy for you to know these two types of cells in our body, and it's good to know a bit more about the body. Is this okay?
Yes, Miss.
Alright. Ini extra information for you sebab kami risau nanti dalam exam kalau dia tanya pasal specific cell type, at least you have the idea what they are. And then now over here, untuk yang lactate fermentation, alcohol fermentation, I dah tulis lah, depends on the type of bacteria. Dia boleh carry out either lactate or alcohol. Lactate biasanya dalam bacteria in the yogurt, okay? Macam lactobacillus. The lactobacillus species that I showed you in your notes, this type of bacteria, they will carry out lactate fermentation. But some other types of bacteria, they carry out alcohol fermentation. So depends on the types of the bacteria. And hari tu Miss bagi tahu kita cakap 2 ATP sahaja. Tapi kita tak tulis 2 net. Kenapa? Sebab sekarang when we look at the comparison 38 ATP ini, kita pun dah ambil kira yang net ATP. So, you tak perlu emphasize sudah, oh 38 net ATP. Tak perlu. 38 ATP dan sini kita pun hanya cakap 2 ATP. Sebab masa kita kira 38 ATP ini, kita memang dah tolak 2 ATP yang dah guna. When we do comparison like this about the total number of ATP for the whole process, bukan hanya glycolysis, the whole process, aerobic respiration, the whole process, total ATP 38 in the active cell. The whole process fermentation, dia hanya dapat 2 ATP. Sebab tu, in this situation, we don't need to write the word net. Did I make it clear?
Yes, Miss.
Yes, Miss.
Maksudnya, masa kita buat perbandingan, macam sini 38, sini 2, then you can just write 2 ATP. That's all. That's fine. Tapi kalaulah dia dah specify dalam glycolysis, if it's just specifically in glycolysis, how many ATP produced, then you have to answer 4. How many net ATP? 2. Kalau itu hanya untuk glycolysis sahaja. Tapi kalau sekarang kita consider the whole process, fermentation, how many ATP produced? We will say 2. Aerobic respiration, how many ATP produced in the active cell? 38 ATP. So masa buat perbandingan tu tak perlulah you cakap oh 38 net, 2 net, tak perlu. 38 je and then 2 ATP je. Boleh?
Boleh, Miss.
And when you look at this one, you can write it here an aerobic pathway, okay? Instead of respiration, an aerobic pathway. Sebab dia tak guna oxygen, that's why we call it an aerobic pathway. Dekat sini, you boleh nampak masa Miss buat perbandingan. Produces 38 ATP per glucose molecule. Bahagian ni sangat-sangat penting. Sebab you kena bagi tahu 38 ATP ini dari berapa glucose. You have to specify this is only from one glucose molecule that we get 38 ATP. So, students selalu salah bahagian ini sebab dia tak tulis per glucose molecule. Dia hanya cakap aerobic respiration produces 38 ATP. It's not complete. You have to tell 38 ATP for how many glucose. It's only for one. Whereas fermentation produces 2 ATP per glucose molecule. Again, you have to emphasize this is only for one glucose molecule breakdown. And the rest, aerobic respiration, products dia carbon dioxide, water. And then ini end products depends on the cell. Kalau dia ialah plant cell, yeast cell, then it should be carbon dioxide and ethanol, alcohol fermentation. Whereas if it's for animal cells or if it says muscle cells or liver cells, semua ini animal cells, or lactobacillus, then you know this is lactate fermentation, so the end product is lactate. What else can they compare? They may compare the final electron acceptor. And you learn in ETC, the final electron acceptor is oxygen. Sebab ini aerobic. Whereas for fermentation, it depends on the type of fermentation. Kalau alcohol fermentation, final electron acceptor ialah acetaldehyde. Dialah yang last terima elektron dari mana?
NADH.
Very good. So, elektron dari NADH ini dia dah pass dekat acetaldehyde. So, acetaldehyde lah yang last terima elektron ini. So, dia final electron acceptor. in alcohol fermentation. Whereas for lactate fermentation, yang last terima elektron dari NADH ialah pyruvate. Ini Miss dah terangkan hari tu, hopefully you faham lah. Lepas tu untuk yang Miss letak last ini sebab ada je tahun yang dia terima sebagai points, ada je yang dia tak. Tapi kalau dalam exam dia nak you tulis essay untuk comparison, then you can include as many points as you can. Yang salah tu dia tak tolak markah pun kalau essay. So just write all relevant points as many as you could for the essay. Janganlah terlampau banyak sangat untuk satu essay lah. Right, you have to manage your time wisely during the exam. And the rest, I think, is easy to understand. It's just that this one, students selalu salah je. If the question asks you about ATP production, kalau soalan tu tanya contrast aerobic respiration and fermentation in terms of ATP production. Kalau dia dah cakap ATP production, boleh tak saya tulis presence of oxygen, absence of oxygen? Can I compare this? Boleh ke kalau soalan nak dari segi ATP production? Boleh tak saya bandingkan, oh ada oksigen, tak ada oksigen?
No.
No, that's it. So what you have to do is to compare anything related to ATP. Okay, inilah salah satu, the number of ATP. Right, what else? What else is related to ATP production over here? Point apa lagi yang mengenai ATP selain number?
Production of ATP, Miss.
Very good. That's it. Thank you, Irfan. Tu je. So these are the 2 points that you can include if the question asks you the differences in ATP production in terms of ATP. Kadang-kadang dia hanya cakap in terms of ATP. So anything that is related to ATP je yang boleh jadi jawapan. Yang lain itu tak boleh sebab dia tak berkaitan dengan ATP. These 2 points will be in terms of ATP. So make sure you read the questions. Kalau dia hanya secara umum, differences between aerobic and fermentation, then you can give any differences. But if they already specify, I want it in terms of something, then you have to read what do they want. If in this case, in terms of ATP, then inilah yang ATP. Yang lain tu tak boleh. Boleh? Faham?
Boleh, Miss.
Boleh, Miss.
Right. So that's the way you answer the structural question. Jangan nampak differences, okay, terus bagi. Tak, baca dulu differences tu dia nak in terms of what. Kadang-kadang dia ada lah, kadang-kadang dia tak ada. And if they ask you to compare, kalau compare, itu kena berhati-hati. Compare differences, you hanya bagi differences. Tapi kalau dia cakap compare sahaja, compare aerobic and fermentation, then you have to give both similarities and differences. Kena bagi dua-dua. Okay, I hope all this, they are clear to you. So, slide ini you bolehlah baca sendiri ke? Anaerobic ini Miss memang tak ajar sangatlah because it's not in your syllabus. But you have to know that we will never do anaerobic sebab itu untuk prokaryotes. Kita ialah eukaryotes. We will not do that. Alright? But you have to understand anaerobic dengan fermentation, they are different. Okay? So dekat sini ada bagi tahu lah prokaryotes boleh buat aerobik, boleh buat anaerobik ataupun dua-dua. Depends on the organism, the bacteria or the archaea. So let's look at this question. Figure 3 shows a schematic diagram of cellular respiration. Sudah buat kan?
Sudah, Miss.
Okay. So let's discuss the questions together. Name the type of cellular respiration shown in figure 3. Okay. Untuk yang cellular respiration ini, yang you nampak dia akan pecah dua. Ada plant cell, ada animal cell. Soalan macam ni ketara sangat dia tanya pasal fermentation. Okay. When you see they separate them into plant cell and animal cell, then most of the time this type of questions is about fermentation. Name the type of cellular respiration shown in figure 3. And this one we will write fermentation. Sebab kalau aerobic, plant cell, animal cell, dua-dua sama. Hanya fermentation je yang kita asingkan dia. B1. State in what condition does the cellular respiration in 6A occur? Apa yang buatkan fermentation?
Absence of oxygen.
Very good. Absence of oxygen. Okay? Sebab tak ada oksigen, itu yang menyebabkan fermentation start. 2. Give one example of the importance of this process in industry. Ini I bagi you lah. Memang ada dalam nota sudah. On the last page, slide 3. So Miss ada letak kurungan, letak star. So these are the examples of importance of fermentation. Dia nak satu je, then you just give one. Any one. Jangan bagi 4 ya. Bagi je satu cukup. Bread making ke atau making fermented food such as, biasanya you kena tulis contoh lagi. Kalau you tulis making fermented food, then you have to tell example. Just give one will do. Tapai ke, tempe ke. Tempe lagi selamat lah. Dan ini yogurt, cheese pun boleh. Manufacturing alcohol beverages pun boleh. And then now name the process N. Okay, let's complete this. Glucose and then glycerate 3-phosphate and then dia jadi last product ialah
Pyruvate.
pyruvate. And class, I will need you to correct the questions. Bukan NADH2, NADH. Please correct that in your photocopy past year questions. NADH and then another one F ADH2. Itu baru ada 2. Ini tak ada NADH. And yes, J is pyruvate. And then we say when there is no oxygen, then dia akan start fermentation in cytosol. And kalau animal cell, what is the type of fermentation for animal cell?
Lactate fermentation.
Very good. Lactate fermentation sebab kita dapat nama dari end product dia which is lactate. Whereas for plant cell, what is the name of the fermentation?
Alcohol fermentation.
Very good. So alcohol fermentation, we actually refers to the end product which is ethanol. And untuk alcohol fermentation, dia ada satu intermediate. What is the name of this intermediate?
Ethanol.
Good job. So ethanol ataupun acetaldehyde. Okay. Mana-mana pun boleh. Kalau you rasa ethanol lagi senang nak ingat, tulis je ethanol. Tapi you pun kena tahu ada nama lain acetaldehyde. Kalau dia keluar dalam exam, dia tulis acetaldehyde, at least you know what it is. And that's all. J, K, L, and M. So now J ialah pyruvate, K ethanol or acetaldehyde, L ethanol, and then M lactate. Ingatlah dia ikut alcohol, so the end product ethanol, so that you won't confuse whether it's ethanol or ethanol. Proses N ini apa? Glucose jadi pyruvate, ini ialah
Glycolysis.
good job, glycolysis. And E, how many ATP molecules are produced from the process in figure 3?
2 ATP.
2 ATP. Oh. Ini yang pelik in figure 3. Jawapan yang dia bagi 4. How many ATP produces from the process in figure 3? Well, I will accept 2, okay? I will accept 2 in this case, tapi mungkin soalan ni you tulis 2 net, okay? 2 net ATP. Or if you write 2 ATP, I think I will accept it too. Sebab dia tanya the whole process here. Right. Okay, F. What is the role of NADH then?
Reducing agent.
Reducing agent.
Good job. Reducing agent. That's it. Class ini I kena tanya another lecturer. Okay. Sebab jawapan dia bagi 4. But then it's quite confusing because sometimes they want the answer as 2, sometimes they want the answer as 4. Or sometimes they give exception, dua-dua boleh. So I will confirm it with you. Okay, now question 7. Again, you can see it's similar to the question that we just did. Dia memang separate plant cell, animal cell, so it's easy to know this is about fermentation again. Name the process shown in figure 7. Fermentation. And then B1, state the condition. Sama lah kan macam yang kita belajar tadi. Ini soalan 2016. Yang tadi tu soalan 2010. So it means 6 years after that, they ask the same questions again. We won't know 6 years from now. Belum sampai. So maybe tak ada lah soalan ini. Tak tahu ada ke tak. So state the condition on how the process can occur. It's the same answer, absence of oxygen. Give one example of the use of this process in industry. Exactly the same thing like they ask here. So sini pun sama. Choose one because they just want one example. C, name compound A, B, C, and D. Alright, this time they have something different. A dekat sini. B, C kita dah tahu lah, ethanol atau acetaldehyde, and then ethanol. D ialah lactate, macam yang kita dah buat tadi. What is A then? Yang kena remove.
CO2.
Good job. CO2. Boleh je tulis CO2 or carbon dioxide. Dua-dua terima. And then the same thing, they ask you about the role of NADH, which we already learned just now, reducing agent. And now the last one is what I ask you to emphasize on. The chemical equation. Tahun tu memang tak expect lah dia suruh tulis the full equation. Sebab previously student just need to know from one glucose dia jadi apa. Tu je. But then in that year, they want students to write the full equation. And that equation Miss ada bagi dalam nota sudah. Boleh rujuk lah yang ni. Kalau lactate fermentation, this is the one for animal cells. Jawapan untuk E2. Okay, so you tulis equation ini. Mesti tulis yang ni ya, C3H6O3. So, you can actually write it like this. For animal cells, untuk yang plant cells dulu, untuk yang plant cells, dia akan produce ethanol, ada carbon dioxide. That's why C6H12O6 ini glucose, dia akan jadi ada carbon dioxide, ada 2 ATP, and then ethanol sebab dah buang satu carbon, so dia ialah C2. C2H5OH. So dua dah balance. Whereas for animal cells, ada decarboxylation ke tak?
Tak ada.
Tak ada. So from pyruvate, which is 3 carbon, dia stay 3 carbon. So we will have C3, H6O2. And then balance it 2. That's it. That's the way you write the chemical equation for both. Okay?
Okay, Miss.
Alright. And now let's look at these questions that I gave you in the extra question set. I like this question because they ask you some questions that you didn't see in the past year exam, which may come out. Okay? Now look at this question here. It still refers to anaerobic respiration in air level, but it's more specifically is lactate fermentation. Okay. Now, in anaerobic respiration, what is the net yield? Net yield of ATP per molecule of glucose? Your answer is
2 net ATP.
2.
good job. 2. So 2 net ATP, or just write 2 molecules will do, because we know that if anaerobic respiration in the skeletal muscle cell, which means lactic fermentation, it only involves glycolysis to make the ATP. Okay, kalau hanya glycolysis buat ATP, then they will only have 2 net ATP. Soalan macam ni dia jelas kalau dia dah cakap net yield and then kita terus tulis 2 net ATP. Tapi yang tadi tu in the process. This one, kalau ikut answer scheme yang dia bagi ialah 4 ATP. Kalau ikut answer scheme tahun tu. Tapi tak tahu boleh ke tak dia terima 2 net ATP. Or class, I would suggest hanya masa kita buat perbandingan je yang kita tulis 2 ATP. Yang lain tu mungkin tulis 2 net ATP, ataupun macam soalan ini kalau dia glycolysis, then we put it as 4 again. But during comparison yang Miss tunjukkan, kalau comparison ini memang tulis je 38 and then 2. Ini memang jelas. Setiap kali buat perbandingan, tulis terus. Tapi kalau dalam soalan macam ini, then you go back to glycolysis way of answering. 4 ATP atau 2 net ATP. Is it okay? So maksudnya hanya perbandingan je, kita tulis 2 ATP. Other time, we follow the glycolysis way of answering.
Okay, Miss.
Sebab Miss pun keliru. Ada masa yang dia nak 2 ATP, ada masa yang dia nak 4. Tapi masa perbandingan tu dia memang macam ni je. 38, 2 ATP. Ini dah fix. Memang macam ni. Hanya masa structure ini yang dia tanya dari the whole process tu, itu yang mengelirukan. Maybe when they ask about the whole process like this, how many ATP, then kita ikut balik yang masa macam you jawab glycolysis 4 ATP or 2 net. Even only if they have comparison. Kalau masa comparison, then you choose yang 38 dengan yang 2. And then this one, what is the net yield of ATP molecules per molecule of glucose? 2 net. Sebab memang dah jelas dia tanya net. B. The mitochondria in muscles contain many cristae. Explain the advantage of this. Right, what is it, cristae? Outer membrane ke, intermembrane space ke, inner membrane? What is cristae?
Inner.
Inner. So inner mitochondria membrane. Right, if you still remember the appearance of the mitochondria, the structure of mitochondria, you can see that dalam tu dia ada banyak lipatan. What can you tell about all this folding? What is it for?
Surface area.
Very good. Every time when they have all this folding, it is to increase the surface area. Good job. So over here, why does the mitochondria in muscles have a lot of this folding? It is to increase the surface area. For what?
ATP production.
ATP production. Good job. What way? Bila yang dia guna inner mitochondrial membrane for ATP production?
Chemiosmosis.
Je ke?
Oxidative phosphorylation ka, Miss.
Good job. Very good. That's it. The whole process, okay? So produce ATP. Very good. That's the concept you need to have. First, ingat dulu cristae tu apa. That's the reason why I say the structure is very important. Look at the structure of mitochondria. Dalam tu dia memang banyak lipatan. Why does it need to have so many folding? It is to increase the surface area. What for? We know that it is for ATP production, but you have to be specific. Dekat inner mitochondrial membrane, what ATP production is that? And that's oxidative phosphorylation. So you answer it like this. Larger surface area for oxidative phosphorylation to provide ATP for the muscle contraction. Inilah advantage dia. Good job, class. That's the concept you need to have. And this may be the type of questions they may ask about application of your knowledge. So larger surface area, or you can say increase the surface area for oxidative phosphorylation. Bukan hanya chemiosmosis, you boleh tulis ETC and chemiosmosis, then you are correct. Tapi tak boleh tulis hanya satu, dua-dua. And then provide ATP or produce ATP for muscle contraction. Jelas?
Jelas, Miss.
Okay. Now for C. Human skeletal muscle can respire both aerobically and anaerobically. Based on figure 4, describe what happens to pyruvate in anaerobic conditions. Okay, ini first part. Bagi tahu dulu pyruvate apa berlaku. And then baru you jawab bahagian kedua. Explain why anaerobic respiration is advantageous to human skeletal muscle. Inilah cara yang dia tanya, cara you jawab pun kena ikut susunan. Jawab dulu what happened to the pyruvate in anaerobic conditions. Lepas tu baru you explain why is this advantageous. Right, first, kalau anaerobic conditions, what happened to the pyruvate? Pyruvate tu macam mana? Kalau skeletal muscle, okay, we are not talking about alcohol fermentation. We focus on lactate fermentation. So first, pyruvate tu macam mana kalau dalam anaerobic conditions?
Reduced by NADH to lactic acid.
Hebat Jordan. That's it. That's the thing. If you want to mention it stays in the cytosol, Yeah, you can include that about the location, but more importantly, you have to tell this pyruvate, okay? The pyruvate is reduced by NADH. So pyruvate is reduced by NADH to form lactate. Good job. Okay, so sini dah 2 marks. Well done. And now the second part. Why anaerobic respiration is advantageous? Hari tu Miss ada bagi tahu. Kenapa penting ada ada lactate fermentation dalam masa sel?
To ensure that ATP production continues even the absence of oxygen.
Very good. That's it. So itu je. That will give you another 2 marks. Okay? So Miss bagilah jawapan ini. So first of all, pyruvate is reduced by NADH to produce or to form lactate. Okay? Ini yang tadi Jordan bagi tu. That's how you get the 2 marks. So sini sampai sini you boleh pilih any 2. I will go for the first 2 points. After that, another 2 points will be from here. Sorry, tak nampak siapa yang jawab. Cynthia. Cynthia jawab ke? So the next part, you can say to ensure that ATP production continues. Okay? Itu boleh. To ensure that ATP production continues. And then even in the absence of oxygen, ini akan bagi you another mark. So allow glycolysis to continue and still can form ATP, or to ensure that ATP production continues. Apa-apa pun boleh lah, dua ini pilih satu je dah dapat 1 markah. And that's how you get the 4 marks. Alright. This is the way you answer. The first part of the question, the second part of the question, ikut turutan. Ikut susunan dalam soalan. And this is a really good question, and hopefully it can help you to see how you can play around with your concepts and put them into the answers. Is this clear?
Clear, Miss.
Okay. So the anaerobic respiration in figure 4 and anaerobic respiration in yeast, yang tu Miss kena you rujuk dekat yang sini. Sorry. This one. Okay. So they ask you to compare. Compare maksudnya differences sahaja ke ataupun similarity and differences?
Both.
Both. Okay. If compare, then I need both similarities and differences. That's why you can give similarity and differences. Berapa markah? 3. Kalau 3 markah, biasanya kita bagi 1 similarity, 2 differences. Similarity yang kurang, differences yang banyak. That's how we do it all the time. When they want you to compare, differences tu yang banyak kan. Okay, so 1 similarity, 2 differences. And make sure you repeat the answer. Jangan macam lactate fermentation occur in animal cell while alcohol fermentation in plant cell. Boleh, ini boleh. Lactate fermentation products are lactate and ATP, while alcohol fermentation, the products are ethanol, carbon dioxide, and ATP. Repeat this, please. Lactate fermentation, the final electron acceptor is pyruvate, while alcohol fermentation, the final electron acceptor is acetaldehyde. Repeat again, final electron acceptor. And sebab soalan tu guna unknown, so sepatutnya you guna balik unknown. Anaerobic respiration in figure 4, the final electron acceptor is pyruvate, while anaerobic respiration in yeast, The final electron acceptor is acetaldehyde. Can you see how I do it?
Yes, Miss.
Is this clear?
Clear.
Okay. All right. So, any question on cellular respiration? We are done for this chapter. If no question, then make sure you do the Google form. I mean, not this week, but during your holiday, so that you can learn the chapters all over again and try to revise everything again and test your understanding. Okay, and that's it for chapter 15.